Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us in our first Facebook live stream. We hope to make this a ongoing series. We think it's a very important topic given all of the changes in the college admissions world. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce your hosts for this. You have myself. My name is Lee Elberson. I am the CEO of Claiborne Education. I've been in the test prep world for a few years, taken most of the tests I could, really love and enjoy them. I'm joined by my colleague and business partner, Scott Webster, who is the director of our SAT and ACT program, and who has spent tens of thousands of hours tutoring students and working with families. And we're also lucky to be joined by Dr. Rebecca Hill, who is our director of college counseling, and she is also the acting executive director of the Better Future Foundation. So thank both of you for being with us today.
Thank you, Lee.
Awesome. Well, we're going to be joined. Seems like there's already some people joining in on the discussion. But for the most part, let's go ahead and let's just talk about the format first. So we're going to spend some time discussing the college admissions world. We're going to spend some time discussing the test prep world, ACT and SAT. And then we'll spend some time discussing what's happening in terms of inequities in the college admissions space. And we invite anyone who has joined us to ask questions in the comments section. I'll be looking out for them, and I'll be posing them to the panel, and we'll answer them to the best of our abilities. And if we don't get to them, don't worry. This is why we're going to make this an ongoing series. So maybe one thing we can do to sort of just get started is, Rebecca, I'm going to toss a softball your way, and you can elaborate on whatever you want, in whichever way you want. Why is the college admissions process so complicated?
That's a great question, Lee. As we all know, getting into college is more than just your grades and your SAT score. Those things are still really crucial. But in the last several decades, what we've seen is a sort of ramping up of looking at how a candidate demonstrates character and interests and passions beyond just what they do in their high school classroom and beyond what they do on standardized tests. Colleges are looking at community service, they're looking at pet projects, they're looking at sports, they're looking at music, they're looking at the arts, they're looking at part-time jobs and internships. They're looking at a whole suite of things that a student presents, as well as their personal statement and any supplemental writing, to demonstrate who they are as a person and who they are going to be foreseeably on that campus. And preparing for all that is not just something that you can do in a weekend or during the summer before senior year. It's something that you have to be working on throughout high school. And sometimes students wait until the last minute to really start thinking about what are the kinds of college campuses that I want to live on and study on. There are a lot of different choices. So while you might be a good fit for one type of school, you might not be a super great fit for a different type of school. And the admissions counselors know that. And they are probably not going to take you if you don't seem to fit the type of student profile that they know thrives on that campus. So there's so many more factors than just test scores and grades, although that is still going to be part of the process this year.
Great. Well, thanks so much for that, Rebecca. Maybe you could spend a few minutes, Rebecca, just sort of telling us what have been some of the changes you've seen in the college admission space in the wake of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a really great question. As we know, some of the big news for Claiborne and for our Better Future Fellows is that many schools are going test optional, meaning you do not have to submit a standardized test score to be considered for that college. But the foundation of how the selection process works is not going to fundamentally change. And that is and always has been, what did you do with what you had? So whatever resources were at your disposal growing up, did you make the most of them? And did you take were you proactive enough to follow your own passions above and beyond what typical high school coursework requires of you? Those things make a great potential college student. So that is not going to change. And there are plenty of things that students can do from home to make themselves stand out as potential candidates for different colleges. And we can definitely talk about that more. But I also want to say that there are many schools, many four-year colleges who have decided for the fall semester it's safer for faculty, staff, and students to stay home for the fall. So those graduating seniors who are already accepted into a college, you really want to keep a close watch on the school's website and news channels, because they may not offer in-person classes for the fall semester. It may not start until January 2021. If that's the case for you, you probably want to do some deep questioning about whether or not it's worth it for you to pay tuition to attend classes via Zoom. And I know that many students have been asking me about the possibility of taking gap year or going to a two-year college, either to defer 1 year and then resume studies at the college that they are going to commit to, or to do a 2-year program at PVCC, let's say, that has guaranteed transfer tracks to UVA, Tech, et cetera. So those are definitely options, and you want to talk about that with your family, both financially and both really around what you want to get out of college. If you don't want to sit at home for the next year, taking classes via a computer screen, there are other options. So there's that. And I also want to suggest to any student, whether you're a graduating senior or a current sophomore, junior, to think about how your prospective colleges are handling the COVID crisis. And I know this is unprecedented, but we're definitely seeing some campuses are really focused on the health and safety and well-being of the faculty and the students. I think that's what every college campus has in their hearts. But some of the decisions that we have seen some colleges make lead us to believe that their first priorities are research, or their first priorities are sports. And if that's not the kind of college campus that you want to be a part of for the next 4 years, there's still a chance to switch gears. So all of those things are answers to common questions that I have received in the last couple of weeks.
Well, Rebecca, you're gonna get ready to get hammered with some questions here. There's a lot to cover. So, I guess a common question you probably got for years is like, what does it mean for there to be a college fit? So I'm going to ask you that question again now, but like, what does it mean for you to have a college fit now that there's so much uncertainty in the college admission space?
It's a very good question. And I think it really comes down to, as a student and a prospective college student, have you done the work of exploring what it is that you want to study and what kind of college is going to help you do that, and what kind of career you see yourself participating in 5-10 years from now? Sometimes a really glamorous college can't really offer you a good pathway to where you want to be in the next decade. So really taking the time to research what are the outcomes of the students who study at these schools. Am I going to get to where I want to be? That takes a lot of time and usually a lot of campus visits, but I know that that's not possible right now. But the good news is that a lot of schools have put virtual tours online. You can also check out any of their social media channels. Many student clubs and choir groups and things like that are still posting live videos of the events that were supposed to take place during the spring semester and were canceled. So you can still get a sense of the flavor of that campus. And also, when we talk about best fit, we're also thinking about where you're going to fall in the pecking order in the general student population. So, if you are going to a top 10 school and you're in the academic bottom 20%, the entire 4 years for you are probably going to feel like a long struggle. And while some students have the kind of resilient personality that likes that extreme challenge, there are certainly many of us who are a bit more sensitive and would like to move through college with a sense of confidence. So you really need to look at where you are situated in terms of course preparation, where you're taking mostly honors classes or the AP classes, or were your classes kind of middling. If you did have an opportunity to take a standardized test, whether it's the SAT or ACT, did you fall within the 25th percentile, the 50th, the 75th? Where are you going to stack up compared to your peers on that campus? And sometimes students who are disappointed to end up at one of their safety schools 2 or 3 years later will write me and say, this is the best thing that could have ever happened because I'm class president and I won all these scholarships. And that probably wouldn't have happened if they ended up at a slightly more competitive school.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rebecca. And I think that's what you're saying. It emphasizes why schools do put some weight on GPA and standardized tests. It's not because they're trying to do cruel and unusual punishment to the students by making them sit in a room for 4 hours. It's to make sure that they're used to the academic rigor of the school, right? And like you said, it sort of depends on, do you want to have to really try to reach up to the top of the mountain because you're coming in the 25th percentile, or do you want to be at the 75th percentile and sort of be able to be the smartest kid in the class at some point? So sort of moving right along and maybe talking about what you've mentioned before. You've always told me that visiting the school is a great way to get a feel for the ethos there and the atmosphere. Is there anything lost in these virtual tours? Because I have to imagine that we've always been able to see videos and maybe go on a virtual tour. Is there anything lost in this process? And the follow-up to that is, what does demonstrated interest mean? Like, if you watch the videos? So if you could tell us a little more about that, that'd be great.
Yes. You will probably notice that on many college websites, the admissions office is clearly broadcasting that they are open for business and want to take student questions. If you're interested in any college campuses, you definitely want to be reaching out. Many colleges do keep a log of students who have sent in emails or have had phone calls or chats with current or former students. So I would definitely be active on those sites. And you're right. I mean, it's very difficult to know if you can live somewhere if you've never visited. And this is why you will still have an entire year to decide if that's the right school for you. So let's say if we're operating on a normal timeline, if you're a current high school junior, you will send in your applications in the fall. You'll be selected in the winter, and you will still have until May 1st, if not later, because as we've seen, timelines have sort of shifted this year. You will still have until May 1st of next year to visit and decide, is this truly the right climate for me? And I would also use this as an opportunity to reach out to family, friends, teachers, relatives, school counselors, see if there's anybody who they know who has recently gone to that school, and see if they would be willing to have like a 30-minute call with you, just so you can ask questions about what their experience was actually like.
Great. Well, the questions are rolling in, Rebecca. We're going to try to get as many of them in as we can before you have to leave at 4. So some really great questions. One of them by Dawn. Thanks so much for chiming in, Dawn. She says, do you think the freshman class for fall 21 will be impacted for admissions because some of the freshmen for fall 2020 may be deferring a year? So how is that going to change the applicant pool?
Yeah, the algorithms that have traditionally worked are not going to work in this next year. And I think colleges are going to be very light on their feet in determining what percentage of the accepted students will commit, and how many seats that they need to reserve for students who have chosen not to enter this year but will enter in fall 2021. We can foresee a situation where the admissions rates will actually drop, because because the schools are holding seats, or it may actually go up. So I know that there were many schools this year who accepted more students percentage-wise than they had in the last 2 decades, because they are uncertain how many of those students are actually going to commit and show up in the fall. So we may see a repeat of that. I think this is really going to be a task for colleges in terms of the logistics of housing and class size. We don't know yet, and this is something that we are monitoring extremely closely, because a big part of deciding what your college list looks like is how many students does this school accept from their pool of applicants. So the numbers, which have been pretty predictable for the past decade, are going to completely change. So we're going to keep in very close contact with what schools are saying. You know, if they're saying we need to cap our admits this year at 20,000 students, then we are going to go with that. I expect that these numbers and these strategies will continue to change throughout the summer. But the good news is that, you know, you have until November 1st to construct a college list that also has deadlines that are a bit earlier. So we have plenty of time to still think about this, but I do expect that the numbers are just not going to be what they were for the past several years.
You know, maybe I have a couple of follow-up questions people have asked.
Sure.
With respect to that, but maybe on that last point, Rebecca, you know, because the colleges need students, they need these enrollment numbers to be able to pay staff. Traditionally, the regular admissions deadlines usually fell around January 1st. How far back do you think colleges are going to push that back as they're trying to increase this applicant pool? And is rolling deadlines a thing that might happen more regularly?
Yeah, I think there's going to be many more colleges this year that resort to a rolling deadline pattern, because I don't think our system of the waitlist lottery is really going to work. I speculate, and I could be wrong about this in 2 to 3 months, but I speculate that December 1st is going to be the new early decision deadline, and that the preferred regular decision deadline will probably move to late January or even February. I think when everyone returns to campus in the fall, if that does happen, it's going to take a couple weeks for everyone to get their bearings and to develop a new strategy for not being 100% sure about how many students are going to submit this year. So I would, like I said, speculate that the deadlines will probably be pushed forward about 1 month, and that more schools, instead of using a wait list, will probably just have rolling admits until their freshman class is full.
Can I interpret from that I'll have a better chance of getting in this coming application year than I would have last year for a similarly ranked student?
I would say yes, as long as the application package had incredibly strong essays and a really compelling suite of activities that the student did outside of school, especially in these current 6 months.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Really good question from Rosalind. Thanks so much for chiming in, Rosalind. So, you know, her question is based on what do we think colleges are going to do in terms of virtual teaching? And so I guess I could pose that as a question. You know, we know that some colleges are going to be doing virtual courses in the fall. Do you think that this is going to be an option for the colleges that do elect to do that? moving forward, if they are having problems with the class of 2020 entering,
Mm-hmm.
will some students have the option of, attending a college entirely virtually, while some students will have the ability to attend it in person? And how will that change the admissions landscape?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I don't really see it so much changing the admissions landscape in terms of numbers or percentages of students that are accepted, but I do see it in changing the perceived quality of that particular college, and that may trickle forward to the next year, where if a college is only offering an online option, more students may steer clear of that. If they are offering a sort of blended, some of the classmates can take it online and some of them will have to show up. That may make students a little bit nervous, because clearly you can't participate to the same level as when you're actually there, when you're sitting behind a screen. So I don't really see that as having an impact in this next cycle, but I do see it having an impact on perceived quality of that college, and that may impact numbers moving forward.
Great. A really great question from Carolyn Morgan. Thanks so much, both of you, for joining us. So I guess the question is basically for high school juniors. Because the grading, some schools moving to entirely pass fail, some with the option, and many different combinations in between. What should juniors be focusing on, and how do you anticipate the grades this year are going to affect college admissions for current juniors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a very serious problem, because depending on where you are in the country, some students are returning to school at the end of this semester, and what kind of school you are enrolled in, whether that's a public school or a private school, and how it typically operates. The grades are not going to matter so much, because everybody knows that even schools that don't have policies that state we're only going pass fail, or every student gets an A as long as they were passing by March 13th. Even if there's not a policy in place for that school system or that school district, a lot of teachers on a personal basis just don't feel right giving a student a C or a B minus when they may not have access to the same resources as their peers. So that said, are grades not going to count? No, absolutely. They're still going to count. People will still see them, and people will definitely judge your performance before this all happens. So first semester grades from junior year will absolutely count. And then first semester fall grades for senior year will also count. That's assuming that we are all back in school and things are operating normally. One of the things that if a student or a parent is concerned about how is GPA going to look in this next cycle, a really great strategy that works for students in all years is taking the SAT subject test. They're only 1 hour. And it gives students an opportunity to demonstrate that they have mastery in a subject that usually isn't tested on a traditional standardized test. So these are things like foreign languages or history classes. If your child really loves those classes and doesn't mind studying for this test, which really just covers what they were supposed to be learning during the academic year, they can take this 1 hour test, and hopefully they will have it open in August when the SAT is offered again. And as long as you're scoring at least a 650 or a 700, it proves that you have committed yourself to that subject. Another route for students who aren't great test takers and aren't maybe not even that great in a more traditional classroom setting, is to develop some kind of research project where you have some kind of work product, whether that's a final essay or a website or an app, something that shows that you have synthesized the learning about a certain subject matter and have created something for people to read or to play with, something that is actually teaching others. And that is a great way to also show that you have extreme passion for a particular subject that may become your college major.
Great. Thanks for that, Rebecca. Dawn and Logan, thanks so much for the questions. There's definitely some questions rolling in about ACT, SAT, and some of the changes there. Scott and I are going to address those in just a few minutes. Rebecca, I think you probably have time for maybe one more question.
Sure. Let's go.
So you mentioned something. I think I heard there could potentially be some grade inflation. You know, it seems to me like some of the very small private schools were very nimble. They were able to adapt very well to virtual learning, and they were able to mimic their teaching environment pretty closely within a week of this COVID transition. Whereas the public schools just it was a very difficult problem for them. So are we going to see a major difference in the school you come from
Yes.
when looking at the grades?
Absolutely. And especially if it is a regional school like UVA or William and Mary or Tech, they get a lot of applicants from the same high schools. And the admissions officers will be privy to what the grading policy was for those high schools. So they will understand that someone coming from, let's say, Charlottesville High School, who got straight A's as a junior, they're probably going to expect a little something extra to demonstrate that student really learned something. So whether that's taking the AP test next month, I know that some students are not sure if they're actually going to do it or not. You should definitely do it. Or taking a subject test in later summer, or developing some kind of personal project. Students coming from public schools where the grades will almost universally be A's will probably have to demonstrate something extra.
Great. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for taking the
You're
time
welcome.
with us today. We will be very excited to have you back. We're hoping to do this again in a couple weeks. So thank you so much. And we will look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.
Thank you so much. Stay safe, y'all.
All right, Mr. Webster. So we're going to get into the world of test prep. Plenty of questions on it. I figured I would kind of start off with maybe just framing of this. And, you and I probably get this question a lot, and that is, why do we need standardized tests, right? We know that there's all of these problems with it. And, it seems like it's an undue burden on a lot of students, and couldn't we just go to a different format? And so, what I've been thinking of recently is the reason why standardized tests are an option, in my opinion, a decent option, is in an ideal world, we wouldn't have standardized tests, and every college applicant would get a chance to speak with the admissions officer and tell them their story. And then the admissions officer would be able to tell them whether or not they were a good fit for that college. But when the applications are in the tens of thousands, or in recent years, 100,000, there's just no way to provide that level of service for every single applicant. And so you need some sort of filtration process. And in an ideal world, a standardized test provides a unified benchmark across all schools. Unfortunately, we know there are inherent biases to the tests. I'm going to go ahead and just quote the CEO of ACT last week in a conference when he was asked about some of the inequities that are inherent in SAT and ACT. He said, yes, we are aware that these biases and these inequities are present, but we either have the option of not providing it at all, or providing to the best of our ability and then leaving it to the admissions officers to sort of make sense of it. So Scott, what I heard from Rebecca is that, the subject tests and the APs, these are just more data points. So what are your thoughts about collecting more data points and how admissions officers would be using this?
That is a great question, Lee, and I think you've done a robust job of framing it for us here. Indeed, my initial reaction to that is, if I were an admissions officer and I have 100 applicants on the table in front of me, I have pages and pages, data points on their academic performance, records of their extracurriculars, it would be preferable to have more data points by which to measure these students than not have them at all, to the CEO of ACT's point. To address the bias that's inherent in any man-made measurement or man-made metric, that is one of the reasons why these organizations are pushing resources to students who come from under-resourced communities. It's another reason why we firmly believe at Claiborne that these resources and these services should be available to all, and why we have historically spent so much time reaching out to the community and trying to provide them those resources. But to conclude, more data better than less, even if that data needs to be scrutinized carefully.
Yeah, that's a great point, Scott. You're right. If you do away with standardized tests, then you have to look at the fact that GPAs also have inherent biases. And so, if you have more data, like you said, you can interpret it. And also, yeah, great plug for not just Claiborne's community investment, but the Better Future Foundation, which was birthed out of Claiborne, aims to help under-resourced students in Charlottesville gain the necessary skills and equip them for college admissions. Because, again, there is a lot of inequity that happens there. So I'm going to start running through some of these questions, Scott. There's a really great one right off the bat. Dawn said, so what are your thoughts about the SAT and ACT perhaps offering take from home tests? Are they fair? Are they going to be valid?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question, and it is pertinent because why haven't they offered these services before? It seems like a no-brainer from the perspective of the test organization that really just needs your registration fee. Why go through all the hassle to arrange with local test centers, the logistical burden, the proctors, that additional overhead? The short answer is they haven't had an effective way to disseminate these tests at home. One immediate concern comes to mind, and that is the efficacy of a at-home test. Meaning, how can you ensure that all students are taking these tests in a comparable environment? Similarly, how do you know that a student isn't just sitting there staring at their phone, looking up the answers to these questions, or next to their tutor, gleaning insights into the test? I think COVID-19 disruptions have moved the needle more in favor of this as an option just by way of necessity. But we do know that there are organizations like, I believe it's ProctorU, that has been developing technology to try to mitigate some of the potential disruptors to take at home environment. It's pretty robust and kind of Brave New World like, where AI technology built into the platform monitors screen light changes to monitor whether you're changing windows. They require you to take a video, 360-degree video of your test surroundings, turn off your phone. We will see whether this truly does present a reasonable alternative to test takers going forward. ACT was already prepared to roll out online or digital test taking this fall. College Board, we're not sure, perhaps had that in R&D, but is now evaluating this with AP tests. It's a mixed bag. It'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
So that's great. So thanks for that summary, Scott. So to summarize what Scott said, so the take-at-home tests haven't been officially announced and offered yet. They've only been hinted at. The College Board and the ACT both said that they are prepared to offer take from home tests in the fall. The College Board's announcement last week was quite a shock. They said that there weren't going to be any tests administered until August 29th. And I know we have a parent on here right now who had a child preparing for the March test. And preparing for a test in March and then being told you don't have an option for another 6 months is putting you either at a huge disadvantage or putting a lot of undue burden on the student. And so I think in speaking to the fairness of the test, the grad prep exams like the GRE and the GMAT and the LSAT now have all implemented take from home tests, and their security procedures are probably going to prevent most people from some basic cheating. So that should help with the validity of the test. The other benefit they have is the College Board and ACT have decades of scaled distributions of what the scores should look like. So if you were a student who was scoring, 1100 on the SAT, and then now you come and take it, and now you're only getting a 1000 because of the difference in formats or other sort of technological issues, they can scale that score. I think the major question, which Scott addressed, is, is this fair? If I live in a household with 5 bedrooms and I have a dedicated office with a great internet connection that can be completely silenced for 4 hours, I'm at a bigger advantage than if I share a room with my brother and he's going to be outside making a lot of noise. So, we kind of feel like maybe the ACT and the SAT are playing chicken, and if one of them announces a take from home solution, the other one will follow suit. And so we still might see tests this summer, but they have not been announced yet. Other questions, Scott? So what is your opinion about the ACT test optional for freshmen entering fall 2021? So this is speaking to the test optional movement. This parent's saying it seems somewhat unfair to judge some students with scores and some without. Could it potentially hurt those who don't submit it? And maybe you could just speak more to what this test optional movement is all about, and if a student has an option, should they be testing or not?
Great question, and another one of the age-old questions. One of the, I think, most cogent criticisms of test optional is that you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? That if you're going to de-emphasize the validity of these standardized testing benchmarks, then do away with them entirely. Of the hundreds, thousands of institutions out there, only a handful of them are truly test blind, where they actually don't look at your scores at all. Test optional movement really has come to the forefront in light of questions of equity. It's been spearheaded by some big name schools like Chicago. I know the UC system has always been wrestling, or has historically wrestled with the question of standardized benchmarks as part of the application process. Test optional is an admissions policy that communicates to an applicant that you do not have to submit standardized test scores. That means implicitly that the other criteria you bring to bear in your application portfolio are that much more important, more heavily scrutinized. And so big picture, though this is an imperfect measure, this is why you should work with a college counseling professional to help you curate your portfolio. But big picture, if you are capable of bringing strong scores to bear, the case for taking the test is strong. There are benefits to doing so. Potentially opening doors of opportunity that would not have been available to you previously. If you have historically not scored very well, if you have lower PSAT scores, or just the environment of standardized testing is not where you flourish, then test optional is compelling when you have those other criteria in place. You have a strong GPA, you have a rigorous transcript. So it's hard to make a blanket statement for or against test optional. For now, again, I just fall back on saying you might as well see how you perform in these tests because they are still valid. And closer to the summer of your rising senior year, that's when you can really evaluate whether you want to bring these scores to bear or select schools that are test optional.
That's a great point, Scott. And I think that's been was very surprising for many of the parents that I worked with when they went to look at the schools who went test optional, that there were criteria, right? You have to have a certain GPA range, and for some schools that GPA range was so high that if you're in that GPA range, you're likely were doing test prep anyway. And I think it probably just speaks to schools needing to filter out the applicant pool, which is what we talked about earlier. And so I think Scott made a very important suggestion, is that you might as well just take a practice test and see how you do. And, one of the reasons why test prep has been so successful in the past at helping students get in is it's one of the areas where you can intensely focus for a few months and improve that score. Whereas GPA, even if you work really hard for an entire year, that cumulative GPA is not going to be nearly as affected. And so, I think that's one of the reasons why many parents elect to do test optional. That elect to go for test prep. So I think I'll just encourage what Scott said. Take a practice test for the SAT or the ACT. Organizations like ours, we do a preference test to make sure that you are taking the right test, because certainly now more than ever, you want to make sure you are preparing for the right test. The SAT and the ACT do have distinct differences, and you really want to make sure that your student is going with the test that best suits them. So Tracy, thanks so much for that question. That was great. So I think, again, there's been many questions about, test optional and under what circumstances students would benefit from not taking the SAT or the ACT. So I guess a question I have, Scott, that might dive into this a little more is, if I decide to take the SAT and then I apply to a school that's test optional, will they see my scores anyway? Do I need to hide my scores? Do I need to cancel my scores? How will I know if the school is going to just look up my scores anyway?
Great question. So Rebecca is probably most suited to answer these particular institutional questions about their approach. However, the general understanding is that schools cannot see any scores that you choose not to submit, right? And so one of the blanket recommendations that we tell families is, when you're taking an official test, do not automatically send them to schools. Yes, you could avoid some of those submission fees because you can send them to up to 4 schools, I believe, as long as you register in advance. But I think the cost of that is recouped with the peace of mind that if it goes horribly wrong, which hopefully it doesn't, but if you are unable to bring to bear scores that you are satisfied with, schools can't go to the College Board or to the ACT and demand a record of your performance. So again, echoing what we've said earlier, worth taking the test just to see how it goes, but don't automatically send scores to schools. Wait for the results to come back 10 days later And then even then you can sit on them until you're about to apply. And that's when you can submit.
Great. Also, great question, Rosalind. Thanks for asking that. So no, you're not required to submit them. This probably speaks to Scott's point. I'll just follow up. So Scott, in your experience, do most students get the score they want their first test?
No. We would hope, of course, that is the case for all students. And there are some notable exceptions, students who just knock it out of the park, even in a shorter testing window or a test prep window. The reality is most students take this test 2 to 3 times, and the national average is creeping up more and more to about 3 times. And there are many reasons for that. One is simply the fact that these data points are representative of a very isolated window of performance. The analogy I would put out there is, when an elite athlete is hoping to showcase their prowess, their abilities to schools, the schools are going to do an exhaustive evaluation of them. They're going to see multiple games, not just one expo or one stat sheet of their gym record, right? They need a better picture. So on the standardized testing side of things, you might as well take this test 2 or 3 times anyway, even if you get strong scores on that first test, because you could always do better. Remember, the College Board has historically super scored. So if you get a really compelling math score in one test, but a disappointing score in verbal, you could potentially flip those scores on your second test, focus on some of the areas of weakness in verbal, bring that score up, and then suddenly you've raised both of your scores to a stronger composite score. ACT has historically not done this, but they announced at the turn of the year that they would. So writ large, it is to your advantage to take this test more than once, possibly even 3 times, depending on your capacity.
That's a great summary of that, Scott. And I know I've worked with plenty of students, and you hit the nail on the head. I mean, pro athlete's probably a good example. So let's say you get the time you want in the big race. Well, why would you not race again to see if you could beat that time, right? On the SAT and the ACT, unless you've gotten a perfect score, there's probably still that thought going around that, maybe I can improve again, and if I don't, it's not really going to hurt me. So. Great. So another comment from Dawn. She says, while on this, she got an email from College Board announcing a September SAT test date. We anticipated this, in making sure that they get students enough testing dates. Not only does the College Board need admissions to keep the business afloat, but we anticipated that they would essentially offer a test every month until college admission. So you could probably expect August, September, October, November, December, and a January test. If the regular decision deadlines are going to be February, it probably makes sense for them to offer another test date. So she did also mention no SAT subject tests. So I would assume, based on what Rebecca said, that because this landscape is changing, they probably will open up SAT subject tests, but we'll have to wait and see. All right, great. Another question from Rosalind. So you mentioned earlier that college admissions has become more complicated because colleges look at more than applicants' GPA and SAT scores. As colleges adopt organic admissions policies, will Claiborne help students explore community involvement opportunities, personal projects, and/or extracurricular activities that will help their application stand out? That is an excellent question, Rosalind, and very timely. We just had an all-hands meeting today, and we spent about 20 minutes discussing, how our staff should be adapting to helping all students think about this. It's not really just test prep students, right? Any high school students, if you're in there for Spanish tutoring, you're in there for SAT, you're in there for organizational coaching, whatever it is, having a more well-rounded resume is going to help you. I think with pretty much anything. It's not just for your college admissions two-year college admissions, trade school, career trajectory in general, you want to be thinking about all these things. So absolutely, we're thinking about the best way to implement this and relay this to parents. But I think more than ever now, parents are thinking about, how can I help my students prepare for the future when that future is uncertain? So excellent questions. Scott, I'm going to pose one to you. I get asked this quite a bit. So if I'm applying to schools in Virginia, what's a good SAT score?
Oh my, this is a question that causes more sleepless nights for parents and students alike than I think any other about standardized testing. The simple and perhaps trite answer is there is no good score. It's very dependent on your ambitions. It's dependent on your school list. But we can calibrate scores. We do know that the College Board and the ACT have these college-bound thresholds. For example, you need to score above 1,000 or above a 20 on the SAT and the ACT respectively for it to even matter in your application. As we communicate with families in our intake and diagnostic process, it's very much geared to the individual. So if a student is hoping to apply to UVA or the University of Richmond or William and Mary, some state schools that are selective and competitive schools, then a good test score is going to put them in the middle of the pack or better for the average class in these institutions. For the schools that I just mentioned, that's going to be above the 90th percentile. So for the SAT, they want you to score in the 1400 range. They want you to score in the 31 range for the ACT. It's an elite score. It is achievable. Even if your PSAT scores or your benchmark ACT scores are significantly lower than that, our reassurance to you is that you can indeed approach those benchmarks. We've seen impressive gains, but a good score is very dependent on the schools to which you are applying. Great
summary there, Scott. And I think, it's important to sort of reiterate what Rebecca said earlier, and that's that it's not like students don't get accepted if you applied to William and Mary with an SAT score of 1200. It just puts pressure on the rest of your application data, because again, schools, the admissions officers are looking at the entire picture, but when one piece of the puzzle doesn't seem like it adds up with their level of rigor, they're looking into the rest of the application. The rest of the application really almost has to prove more that this student is ready for this level of rigor. And that's what happens at these top tier schools, is they are not trying to be selective for the sake of just, declining a lot of students. They're doing it because they know that the classes that they offer have a certain amount of rigor, and they want to make sure that students will be successful in attending the university and graduating in 4 years.
And Lee, if I could just piggyback off of that very briefly, there's also an important distinction between your math and verbal scores. We've talked about composite benchmarks, but if you are hoping to apply and get into MIT for a robotics program, if you bring 75th percentile math scores and 99th percentile verbal scores, there's a discontinuity between your application portfolio and your standardized test scores. Not to say that you cannot be an effective engineer or a medical professional if your math scores are not superior, but it does indeed cause admission officers to scratch their heads, which we don't like.
All right. Well, Scott, I've got a question that hasn't been asked, but that's been on my mind. So we accurately predicted that the College Board was going to cancel their June tests. We knew that they were going to announce some sort of take from home style test. you and I were both in that conference with the CEO of the ACT last week, and I haven't seen them cancel the June test yet. What does, what do you gather from that? And what do you think's going on there?
One can only speculate. I think you mentioned this earlier. They're hedging their bets. Let's not forget that this is a marketplace. The standardized test industry is a billion-dollar industry, so multi-billion-dollar industry. So as College Board is pivoting their timeline and their test offerings, ACT is evaluating their position relative to the other major test entity. I can only speculate, but I imagine ACT is being cagey as they're marshaling every resource available to evaluate what they can realistically offer. They don't want to lose out on students who are registered for June, trying to kind of keep calm and press on, I suppose. But we do indeed fully expect an announcement any day now that the earliest you can take this test, the ACT, would be July, even possibly August, September. We will see.
Great. Well, Scott, it looks like that's going to wrap up our questions. I guess, there's, given the attendance and all the questions here, I think we definitely want to thank everyone for chiming in. We are going to plan on doing this. We're going to set another calendar event for 2 weeks from now, and we'll be joined by Scott and myself and Rebecca, and maybe can even get a couple of more admissions folks in here. This video will be available on our social channels, so please feel free to share it. Please, if you will, like our page. We appreciate your support. My sales manager would be very upset with me if I didn't mention that we are going to be soon running a promotion. The first session will be free, and then we're going to offer 20% off of all of our college admissions packages. Going to be our best promotion by far. So reach out to us contact us at claiborne.com, or go to our website, claiborne.com, and fill out the inquiry form. Or you can call us at 434-295-4501. Richard Needham is always happy to discuss with you your needs. And in closing, from everyone here at Claiborne Test Prep, be safe and be well.